Hey there, my name is Marcy, and I am going to be giving you a very quick recap on the talk that I gave at FNCE 2019, our big conference for registered dietitians here in the US. And this year, I had the great honor to be invited to speak on the topic of body image, a topic very, very near and dear to my heart. And this was a really special honor because body image had never been spoken about on the FNCE stage in all of FNCE's history, which FNCE has been a huge conference going on for over 100 years. So I felt very honored to speak on a topic that I care so much about with a colleague who I've gotten to know in the process of developing our talks together, Daphne Lordley, who is an amazing researcher and dietitian in Ottawa, Canada. So she kicked off our presentation looking at some original research that she and her colleagues have done, looking at the experience of bodies and body image for registered dietitians as well as dietetic students, and made a really important case for introducing body image into undergraduate conversations as part of our training, which I think is vitally important. We know this, I'd say practically speaking, through our experience as human beings, that body image and negative body image impacts us as dietetic students and as dietitians, but in particular, we tend to feel a lot of professional pressure to look and be a certain way. So addressing that while we are young in our careers is incredibly important because it impacts our work as clinicians. My part of the talk was focusing on how to do, quote unquote, body image work with our clients. So it was a nearly 40-minute presentation. So in the couple of minutes I'm going to be talking with you, I'm going to be giving you just little pieces here and there, certainly not the whole talk, but I really started off my talk, as I often do when speaking about body image, with an invitation, and I'm inviting you to think about what body image means to you. We say body image, and it's easy to assume that it means the same thing to all of us. Of course, there are academic definitions of body image and how it's used in the research, but I think most importantly, when we're thinking about our work with clients, is what does that term mean to you as a clinician and also as an individual? And for those of you listening to this who are not clinicians, what does the word body image mean to you? And I think that's one of the most important starting points in the conversation around body image, is to talk about that. And I often think of it as a perceptual experience or a subjective experience of our bodies or how we imagine our bodies to be. And it's really a combination often of perceptions and thoughts and feelings and actions, all relating to one another. And I think it's important to think of it as a subjective experience because we know that body image is not a static experience. It's something that morphs and changes even on a day-to-day basis. So that was kind of where I began the conversation. And I talked about different definitions of body image from sort of an academic standpoint, looking at positive psychology, which has its own definition of working on positive body image, and also looked at it from one of my favorite angles, a neurobiological angle. And I have been following the work of Scott Mosman, who is a researcher and has spent quite a bit of time researching body image, and very, very cool work. I attended an amazing workshop that he gave where he shared kind of the latest neuroscience research on body image, which we have a long way to go in the research, but currently we understand body image to be processed in 9 different parts of the brain. And the part that I will share with you that I think is perhaps most interesting is that only one of those parts of the brain is related to cognition or thoughts related to body image. And yet, 5 of the 9 parts of the brain related to processing body image have to do with regulating feelings, particularly related to fear and anxiety. This to me gives me clues as to why often trying to change our thoughts about our body image tends to not be very successful. Sometimes it can have a positive impact, but a lot of times it doesn't have lasting impact. And my sense is that we need to be working on the skills and tools that help us at more of the emotional and body-based responses that we have. And I'm going to get to that in just a minute. So that was kind of the beginning part of the talk, was talking about sort of how do we define and conceptualize body image and body image work. Then the next thing I talked about were challenges that gets in the way, particularly for registered dietitians. And I talked about a number of things. One, that this can feel very, very personal. We all have a unique body image story, and as dietitians, we can feel even more pressure around how it is that we look. And then I also talked about concerns around scope of practice, issues related to this concept, a psychological concept related to countertransference, or the reaction that we have as human beings that is sort of clinician to client. So we have an emotional reaction to our clients, and sometimes it can be a little bit more heated in the topic of body image, especially if we haven't, as clinicians, had the opportunity to do some exploratory work and healing work on our own body image story. And then we talked about weight stigma, scope of practice, countertransference. I think those were the biggies. And then the next part of my talk, we addressed kind of what does it look like to do the work? What are the interventions that we might use? And I gave a whole host of examples and ideas, but I'm going to share with you two that I personally believe, and I do think that there's some good evidence in the research to support what I'm going to say, is that the most foundational work that you can do for yourself as a clinician, but also for yourself as an individual, is to develop a practice, two different practices, but related practices on mindfulness and self-compassion. And this is imperative to begin to develop the skillfulness, be able to notice when you're having a thought, notice when you're having an emotion, and to not be merged with those thoughts and feelings, but to be able to develop a distance from and sort of the ability to sort of observe in a compassionate, non-judgmental way. And developing those tools around mindfulness and self-compassion opens the door to be able to perhaps make different choices, but to also be with ourselves in moments that are really painful or really difficult. I personally don't believe that the goal of body image work is so that we're always feeling happy about our appearance. Not at all. That would be like going to therapy and thinking that the goal is to always feel happy in life. We know that having a body can be difficult. We live in a very toxic culture that sets unrealistic standards, and we're kind of bombarded with those messages. And that a lot of the capital that we might feel in this world is what we bring to the table with our bodies. And it takes a lot of internal work to be living within this toxic system. So I think it is normal to assume that we are going to have days that we feel really, really challenged in our bodies, particularly if we live in bodies or have identities that are marginalized and mistreated, particularly people in larger bodies or racial minorities or people who have a different sexual orientation, who identify as asexual or homosexual. We know that there are increased challenges for individuals who have additional identities that are often mistreated. So the work is very complicated, and it doesn't mean you're doing it wrong if you don't feel positive about your appearance all the time. What I try to focus on is the development of skills to be able to tolerate living in this kind of environment. So hopefully over time, we can feel less preoccupation and less pressure around making our bodies conform to an ideal. And also developing some skill to be able to put the finger pointed in the right direction, which is outward at our culture rather than inward. So those are some of the preliminary thoughts that I shared at my FNCE talk. One thing that I want to say as I wrap up, particularly to you as clinicians, if you feel unclear about doing body image work with your clients, it likely means one of two things, and maybe both things. That first, begin that work with yourself, whether that's with a professional or on your own. Seek out resources, training, workshops, books, podcasts to move forward in your own body image journey. Nothing will give you greater confidence or ability to help another person by setting the groundwork of first making sure you've looked inward. And the second thing is doing that continued training. That body image work is a specialized type of work that requires additional training for all disciplines, not just for registered dietitians. So those are my 2 cents for what they are worth. If you're interested in learning more, you can head over to my website where I have some freebies, a couple of published papers and a clinician cheat sheet. It's at marcrd.com/bodyimage. Have a good one. Bye.